Given the way that it's marketed and its reputation, could the KTM 1290 Super Adventure S possibly be the most misunderstood and often overlooked big adventure touring bike on the market? It's always good, of course, to come back and revisit a bike. Often you only get a press bike for a week or 2 weeks at the most, and although you can get quite a few miles on it and get to know the bike quite well, going away, riding something else, then coming back to this at a later stage often does help to form a slightly different opinion, or indeed cement an existing opinion you already have. I previously reviewed the 2021 model year of the 1290 Super Adventure S, and I'll put a link up in the top corner for you to go away and have a look at that if you've not already seen it. So I don't want to cover over a lot of that ground again in this video, because the jump from model year 21 to 22 didn't actually bring very many differences at all. So in this video, I just want to get out and ride it and talk about what I think are the key points and really give you a feeling for this bike. Normally I'll go through all of the stats and pieces on this bike, but as you can see, I've put those on the screen behind me so we don't have to worry about those. Let's just get straight into the riding, and I can tell you what this bike is like to ride and things that I've noticed, both good and bad.
Makes sense to start with the engine because that's what gets a lot of the headlines. There's obviously a big concentration on that headline horsepower number. For me, actually, it's the torque that's more important about this bike, and that's because I think with this whole ready to race thing that KTM have, and the concentration on this, you know, the beast and all that sort of stuff that goes around it, I think people assume it's a snarling, angry machine. Now, of course, it can be angry and snarly if you want it to be, but it is actually quite a pussycat because you've got that massive amount of torque, which comes in really low down in the rev range and just seems to be pretty constant all the way through. The 1301cc twin engine is an absolute peach. I loved it when I rode the Super Duke. I loved it in this. I've loved it in the Super Duke GT. It's a big old lump of an engine, but it's just so flexible but really relaxed as well. That power, it's always there on tap, it seems, regardless almost of what gear you're in. I did joke with a friend of mine who rides, because he knows I like the Africa Twin, he knows I like that DCT gearbox, and I said you can kind of almost ride this like a DCT. Fourth gear is good from 20 miles an hour to 120 miles an hour. Don't ask me how I know. One of the positives of the bike, I think, is just that huge amount of torque, which if I wanted to overtake a vehicle now, I don't have to change down the gear. I can just roll the throttle on. Even there, fifth gear, no complaining. And it just makes for really effortless progress on the road. Thank you, Mr. Postman. As a touring machine, this is just going to be fantastic because you've got the comfort of an adventure bike, you've got that upright riding position, you've got decent weather protection, but you've still got the performance of a sports bike if you need it. But it's equally happy pootling around town at slow speeds. It is a wonderful engine, I love it. And combined with that quick shifter, it's just an absolute peach. I am actually considering changing my 790 Adventure for something bigger, where I can do a little bit more touring all year round. And this previously wasn't on the list, but it's gone on there now because I think it's just, as an overall machine, it's just fantastic. We've got a nice comfortable seat. Typical KTM is harder than some others, but I've found it to be really comfortable, easy to reach. The ground for me, with a 32-inch inside leg, it's not too tall because obviously this is a more road focused version. It hasn't got masses. Well, actually it's still got, I think, 220 mil of travel, and a relatively decent ground clearance. but it's not stupidly high. Because of the way the bike handles and because of the way that weight is distributed, the bike feels actually much smaller and lighter than it is. It's interesting, I picked this up after dropping the Desert X off, and obviously the Desert X is a taller, higher bike, it's more off-road focused, but whereas previously I've ridden this jumping from my 790 into this and it felt big, jumping from that Desert X into this felt actually like a pretty small bike. The layout's good. I love these controls and I'll touch on those later on. One thing that has impressed me is the screen. Adjustable screen, you've got a little winder on the side here, you can wind it up and down. I think this is in, yeah, it's in its highest position. And in its highest position, I can easily ride with the visor open at motorway speeds even. And again, this is going to be dependent on your size. I'm 5'10", and I just seem to sit underneath that lip, but overall the screen I think is very good. It's one of the better ones I've tried. $15,500, you kind of think that's a little bit steep, but when you consider that this bike has that fantastic engine, the WP semi-active electronic suspension, radar, cruise control, which I thought was a gimmick initially, but if you see it, I'll put a link in my video to that section of the original review video. It works faultlessly, and it's something that I never thought that I would use, but having ridden this on the busy A1 and the M1, you can just leave it on. You don't have to keep switching it and flicking it off and on. Going to be sat in a lot of traffic here, so let's turn off. I find it to be an incredibly manoeuvrable bike as well. It's one thing I do often with a bike when I get it is to take my hands off the bars and just to see how balanced that feels. And yeah, this is lovely. Really good weight distribution. It's 220 kilos dry, so with the big fuel tank that you've got on here, you're going to be looking at 240 kilos maybe fully fueled. But again, because this bike uses those saddlebag tanks that we first saw on the 790 Adventure, the weight is down low. It's much lower down here. You know, if I compare it to something like the Ducati Desert X that I've just got off, a completely different bike really in reality, but you know, that's got a tank up here, handlebars up here, Africa Twin tank up here, handlebars up here. This is much lower at the front here, and for road work I think it's a better bike. The one thing where obviously this lower front end has some disadvantages is when you want to stand. The bars are just a little bit too low. I'd like those to be a little bit higher. When you're riding normally it's fine, it's just in that standing position. But obviously this bike with the cast wheels is not going to be taking you too far off-road. Obviously you've got the off-road modes, which have been very good. It depends on the skill of the rider, but really it's going to be limited to fire roads and forest tracks, graded byways. You know, it can take you a fair way off-road, but I think really the people that are buying this are going to be more using it like an adventure tourer, where it's predominantly road biased with a little bit of gravel in between. This Speedo, as I found with all KTMs, is fabulous. It's huge, lots of information on there, but what they haven't done is try to kind of put fancy graphics on there. Yeah, you've got a little thing when it starts up that shows you all of that, but everything is really clear and concise. And the controls, despite that looking quite complex, the controls are really easy to use. So to access anything on the menu, just press that button right, and then we straight away get the opening page, which is your bike info. And this is just a quick visual check. So this is showing me tyre pressures are green, the battery's green, the fuel tank's green, which means that I've got no problems there at all. If anything comes up amber or red, then you've got a problem and it's something you have to deal with. So it's a good visual initial check. One click down gets you your trip info. As you can see from here, my average fuel consumption is 52 miles to the gallon. The next one down takes you into your motorcycle, and that's where you got your ride modes, which is street, sport, rain, off-road, and this is fitted with the optional rally pack. You've got your ABS mode and your traction control and rear wheel slip. And this is where you can change your suspension mode. So you've got sport, street, comfort, off-road, advanced, where you can tweak it, and auto. I found auto actually to be a really good thing to leave it in. If you start riding more aggressively and pushing harder, it automatically stiffens the suspension up. If you ease off like I am doing here and come through town, it puts it into the comfort mode. And to be honest, I found no reason whatsoever to leave it in anything other than auto. Then you've got your preload adjuster, and here you can change the ride height. You can either do it in 10% increments, or you can have it as the standard, the low or the high. And then you've got the anti-dive, which I have on. See, that just stops the front forks from diving under hard braking, and it really does make a difference, and I tend to leave that on all the time as well. Obviously, one thing that gets talked about with these bikes is reliability, and not being an owner, I can't comment on that. One good person probably to have a look at is, if you haven't seen him already, is Sam Vincent. I'll put a link to his YouTube channel up there. He owns a 1290 Super Adventure S, and he's put quite a few videos out of his experiences with it, and I think there are a few little niggles but no major problems. And I think the whole sort of KTM unreliability thing always seems to be a little bit overblown. So my 790 Venture, I've had no real issues with that at all, and that bike's done 25,000 miles now. And it's the same with any bike. I think if you get a bit of a lemon, a bike where you get problems from any brand, that's going to be happening. And obviously the people that shout the loudest online are those that have had a bad experience, so that's always going to magnify the problems. I'm sure there are some issues, but on all the time I've had this, I've had no issues. I've had no funny warning lights come up. Everything's just worked exactly as it should. In terms of negatives with the bike, well, orange. I'm not a massive orange fan. That's not really a negative, is it? I'm just being silly. And the other negatives, well, I'm not a massive fan of the tyres. This has got the Mitas tyres on it as standard, but on dry tarmac they're pretty good. In the wet, I'm not entirely sure I've got a lot of confidence in them, and that's going to be down to personal preference. In terms of handling, it is obviously an upright adventure bike, but as I said before, slightly lower at the front. You've got a really nice connection with that front wheel, so if you want to start to have a little bit more fun in the twisties, it's just fantastic. I don't want to sound like I'm kind of kissing KTM's backside, but I think they've just got this bike sorted. And if you want a bit of an all-round bike, something that you could go and tour on, I mean, the trip I did recently in Europe would have been such a breeze on this bike. I could have made use of the autobahns a bit better than I could on my 790. Admittedly, the weather was shocking, but if you want to scratch around the lanes like this, it does that well. If you want to do a little bit of simple off-road, it will do that as well. I'll put it into off-road. Shut the throttle. Here we go, we're in off-road mode. Got to bear in mind that these tyres are not really suitable, but this, it doesn't look like it's going to be too muddy. But what I'm more interested in doing is seeing how the suspension changes. I'll remain sitting down through here just so I can get an idea of what's going on. Yeah, it's definitely softened it up a little bit. It feels a little bit plusher. It goes through that travel a little bit quicker. It's obviously not that rough here, but it is giving me quite a nice smooth ride. Let's give it a little bump. Yeah, pretty comfy. But you've got that little bit of wheel spin at the back there. It just feels like just a very easy bike to ride. The left is normally full of massive puddles. So and this section here is generally, yeah, you can see there's more rocks. It's a little bit harder down here. Obviously one of the drawbacks with this board at the moment as standard is that I've got the rubber foot pegs in, which can be a little bit slippery when they're wet, and they take away a little bit of the feel. There's a bit of cluttering going on, but this bike does come with a centre stand as standard, and that's what is rattling around at the back. Squirrel. Missed him, thankfully. There will be people that will want to take their bikes, you know, much further than places like this, but for the majority of the owners of this type of bike, this is going to be adventurous enough. Yeah, these tyres are not liking the mud that much. I'm not a pheasant plucker, I'm a pheasant plucker's son, and I'm only plucking pheasant till the pheasant plucker comes. I think I got away with that one. All calm and collected through there. No problemo. Not really an off-road test. I don't have the skills to do that. I don't really have the locations to do that either. But I thought I'd do a little bit of trail riding for you just to show you. Flick of the custom button takes me back to the riding mode. So I'll put it into street. Close the throttle. And there we go. Quick shifter's really good. I've had no issues with the quick shifter whatsoever. No missed shifts. But as a carving, the twisties on the bike, it is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. The brakes are awesome. And the exhaust note is pretty good too. From an aesthetics point of view, I actually think it's a really nice looking bike. I think of the out of the KTM range, this is one of the nicest looking ones. The only thing you notice is that rear silencer is massive. It is absolutely huge. The level of kit on the bike is good. We've got Brembo brakes. They might not be the top end monoblocks, but they work really well. We've got really nice cast lightweight wheels on here. We've got our hydraulic clutch. The electronics package is fantastic. There's so much to like about this bike, and I think sometimes maybe, as I indicated in the thumbnail, it's often a slightly misunderstood bike. I think people think it's going to be a big, snarly, horrible rah. It is truly a fabulous all-round bike, and it does. It's kind of on my list. It does. It is prodding away at me. Leave it in street mode, set the suspension height as standard, put the electronic semi-active suspension in auto mode, and just leave it like that, and you've got a hell of a bike for all kinds of conditions. When I picked it up, it rained. I don't seem to have had much luck in terms of rain recently, and as it was my first ride on this for a while, I just stuck it into rain mode, which I think knocks the power down to about 100 horsepower. I think it really is a competitor for those big adventure bikes, and I think it's even a good competitor to a lot of the sports tourers. But you've got that upright riding position, more comfort, more options for luggage. There's cornering lights in here as well, so at night as you tip it into the corner it lights up the apex. They work really well. I guess the only niggles are the rally mode. You have to get switched on separately, but I would argue for most people, are they really going to be bothering to put that? I have that switched on. The off-road mode is there as standard. One thing that doesn't come as standard is heated grips, which I think should do, and I'm not sure about the quick shifter whether that needs to be switched on as well or not, but I'll check and put that up on the screen. Things like heated grips on a bike like this, in this day and age, for, you know, the £200 that they cost to put on, I think really on a bike like this the manufacturer should be chucking it in. So I say, there's probably not much more that I need to cover on the bike. I think I've said pretty much everything I need to. It's a very, very impressive machine. All in all, at £15,599 I think they are at the moment. It's a lot of money to spend on a bike, but you do get, as I've said before, a hell of a lot of bike for that money. This is an absolute cracker. Thankfully I don't have a spare £15,000 in the bank, otherwise I'd be having a discussion with my local dealer about one of these. Oh, it's so much fun.
So there you have it, a truly fantastic travel adventure bike. The more I ride it, the more I like it. It does a little bit of everything. You've got that kind of hooligan sports bike element, which I think obviously a lot of it gets sold on that kind of reputation. But this engine is an absolute peach. It's a real pussycat to ride, and when you look at all of the kit that you get on it for the money, I don't think it's a bad deal at all. But if you do have any comments or questions, or there's something that I've missed, then let me know in the comments section down below. And all that leaves me to say is, until next time, thanks for watching, take care, ride safe, and I'll see you soon. Bye.